Find your future by exploring your world. The Massachusetts School of Law challenges their students to explore the important issues of our time, learning from experts in fields like politics, sports, and business law. From first-hand accounts and dramatic reenactments, in-depth conversations with society's leaders, from historians to lawyers, from high-tech professionals to environmental experts. The Massachusetts School of Law at Andover presents MSLAWTV163.
For anyone who watched the movies The Blind Side or Blue Chips, you would think that having recruiters knocking on your door or sitting in the stands watching your every move would be the best thing that could ever happen to any high school or college athlete. And I'm sure it was for a lot of student athletes, but not for one 16-year-old from Durfee High School in Fall River, Mass. For him, the pressure became unbearable. This promising athlete was called the best white guard since Jerry West. Now that has other problems with it as well, but with that became an enormous amount of pressure. He was viewed as the next great hope. All that pressure made him turn to drugs. We talked to that young man, now a grown-up father of 3, who has written a very candid new book in which he talks about his spiraling down and out lifestyle and his addiction to drugs and what that did to him and his family and his basketball career. The book is entitled Basketball Junkie, a Memoir, and our guest is Chris Herron. Also joining us is Frank Catapano, a national basketball player agent and Chris's agent for many years. Chris explains just what it felt like to have those agents sitting in the stands and watching his every move.
I think when you're 16 years old and you look up in the stands and, there's Rick Pitino and Billy Donovan and Stu Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, I don't think any 16-year-old knows how to deal with that. Besides performing at a level that they expect you to perform and that you want to perform, because you don't want to fail. So I think the whole remedy is a disaster. I wish the NCAA would change actually that process and start the recruiting process later on. Their senior year, late junior year, senior year, because I had them around since I was a freshman, and it was difficult.
Now you had your pick of schools, and it came down to a choice between Syracuse and BC. Hometown boy stays hometown. In retrospect, you wish you made a different decision there? Because I know at BC, at least initially, you were on the cover of Sports Illustrated with Ray Allen and Allen Iverson. You were the next 3 greats.
Yeah, something I wouldn't, hindsight, looking back, maybe what I would change is go to prep school for a year. Rather than jump onto a college campus with all that freedom, I would change that. If I would change anything, I might change staying at BC and going through what I had to go through and finishing there. Fresno was great to me in different ways, but when you're 35 years old and you see a BC education as opposed to Fresno State, it's a little different.
The degree would have made a little more impact.
Yeah, of course. The degree, you can only play basketball for so long. And I don't care if you played in the NBA for 10 years, you still got to live 2/3 of your life, without basketball. And that degree is a huge plus, going forward. So.
Now, you saw your drug and alcohol problems really started, though, in high school?
I tell kids when I go and speak to kids at schools, I drank in high school, I used drugs in high school. Not the hardest drugs, mostly marijuana, and some hallucinogenics once in a great while. But I think the cautionary part of it that I can tell kids is that there were kids in high school that were much worse than me. Kids that were drinking much more, smoking much more, taking much more. But I started that process in high school, yes.
Do you think that that is an additional pressure, not just on the athletes in high school, but all the kids in high school? Or, a lot of if they could see the road as you now see it, would they be making different choices in high school?
Well, I think it's, I think every kid has, doesn't have the perfect life, and and I think it's extremely hard to look down that road. Back when I was 17 years old, my goal was to, my goal in life was to win a state championship at Durfee. That's all I saw. I didn't see past that. But when I go around and I speak to the schools and the kids at prep schools or colleges, I just tell them that, it's whether it's basketball, law school, whatever it is, if it's causing too much stress and it's becoming difficult in your life, you need to remove yourself from it. And I try to tell kids that, because that's what was a huge source of stress for me.
Now, when you got to BC and you were playing college ball, there were more parties and more activities. I guess I wonder, to what extent do you think that anything could be done about that, if we could go back in hindsight, or if we can even think about players today must have very similar experiences, and it's awfully hard for a young kid to be exposed to such things.
Yeah, I think I was on that road. I was on that road to living that life. I was, I was a little different in my party social circles. A lot of athletes that I played with would look at me and say, "I don't know how you do it." So, I was definitely on that road to a rough road, and but it's not at BC. BC dealt with it different. BC dealt with it with a very hardline approach, and I said that in the book. Fresno handled it very differently, with more of an enabling approach and trying to help me through the process. Which one is right, I have no idea, because it was years after the fact that I found sobriety. So who knows?
Frank, with the latest philosophy in college for a lot of the students to be, this one and done, how many high school seniors are really prepared for the rigors of major college programs and then a very quick introduction into the MBA, in your experience?
I'd say probably zero, although depending on what their upbringing was and the people around them, you'll have varying results. I don't think it's ever healthy to put people in before they're ready to do something. And, one of the things Chris answered before, but I'd just like to throw my 2 cents in on it. When you talked about Jim Calhoun and Rick Pitino and whatever big-time coaches were visiting Chris, it's not just the player who's sucked in by this. It's the family and friends. And they live vicariously through that person. And that person, I don't think, is ready to have people live vicariously through them. And having been in the agent business a long time and having dealt with some high-profile guys, I made the same mistake myself sometimes, wanting more for a person than they were ready to do, wanting more than they really wanted for themselves, and not really understanding where they came from. And I think a lot of different things caused the problems Chris has. And I know in his book, he takes the blame for most of it, but I think everyone around him, all throughout his period, could have had a little more to do with him getting out of this sooner if they really were just looking out for his best long-term interests and not looking out about his basketball ability or his star power and things. So I think I don't think many of these kids are ready for it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Tark the Shark and the Fresno State period, because in reading the book, and it's a terrific read, sounds like, well, that's your second chance. But it wasn't just your second chance, it was Tarkanian's second chance, and it was somewhat chaotic. You said, you talk in the book about some of the team members are on the Bloods and some are on the Crips, and that's no fooling around that was a serious issue, that the team was pretty much a mess. But at least initially, I think you saw it as sort of a salvation, potentially.
I saw it as a life vest. You know what I mean? I was drowning. I was back in Fall River. I was hanging out at a friend's house, and not many schools were really reaching out. You know, I mean, that's just the reality of it. I had talked with Pat Kennedy at Florida State and a couple other schools. I think it was Tom Penders at Texas at the time. But not many were really coming after me. And I grew up watching Duke, UNLV. So when he called and said, listen, I'm starting over, and I'd like you to start with me, that was appealing. You know, I played with Bloods and Crips. I played with kids who came from very tough backgrounds, and I think, you know, that I try to have it come across in the book. I was probably more mental than all of them. Mm-hmm. You know, I had guys on my team that would come out with me and they would be home by 2, and I'd be going till 7 in the morning. You know, so those kids would look at me and say, you know, you're out of your mind. I got to go. And you know, so the whole situation there was difficult. It was set up to win immediately, so we took in as many high talented kids, no matter what the background. And when you put all those kids in one locker room, it's going to be volatile. And I mean, I think we ended up having, I mean, on one team we had 8 NBA players. I mean, we were talented. We were as talented as they got, but could never translate over to the NCAA tournament or too many success after into March.
How are you able to do that? I mean, because you would party till dawn, get a little bit of rest, if that, and then back in the gym and playing these pretty high-profile games. I mean, how could you fuel that for that long?
You know something, I think it's, I can't even answer that question. I mean, I remember times pulling into the arena, playing on CBS, and I hadn't slept yet. You know, walking in to play UMass, I think it was a 2 o'clock game on ESPN, and I hadn't slept. And you know, I didn't have a choice. Mm-hmm. I had to play. But I look back and I shake my head. I'm blessed that I was able to not forget play, but to make it. You know, make it through.
Let me ask you about the UMass game with when you're with Fresno State. So now you're a sophomore, or should be thereabouts in college. You're coming home. Hopefully this was your second chance to play with Fresno and be back at UMass. And you describe a particularly horrific experience out at the UMass game where they're taunting you with druggie. And I mean, as a sophomore, again, that has to be pretty hard to be listening to all of that as you're getting ready to play a game on ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, I had that since day one. You know, I've been dealing with taunting since I was a freshman in high school. Mm-hmm. You know, my first game in Weymouth, I was 14 years old, and you know, I was introduced in warm-ups, and they started singing New Kids on the Block and had newspapers up in front of their face. I remember playing in that game and being scared to shoot the basketball, and you know, that was my first real feeling of these people don't like me, you know, and that went on for many years. And you know, I've had athletic directors get on the mic and at half court and ask their students to stop because they chanting Chris Heroin or the druggie. And coming home to coming home to UMass and hearing that, I was expecting it. At that time, it fueled me. Mm-hmm. But you know, you look back and you say, I mean, how can any 18-year-old kid have to be subjected to that? You know, and expect to come through in a positive way. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I have children myself now, and if I'm sitting in the stands and some guy's calling my son, you know, a bum, you know, and a drug addict, you know, I'd have a tough time handling that. You know?
I bet.
And never mind when there's 14,000 doing it, you know.
So it's not exhilarating. It's at the end of the day, that still leaves scars.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. It does. You know, it definitely leaves scars. You know, at the time, you have no choice but to use it, against them. But it's a tough process. It's definitely a tough process to go through.
And so then at some point, while you're still with Fresno State, the whole team really sort of ends up in a disaster. Mike Wallace does a piece on 60 Minutes. Yeah. You, a kid from Fall River, get to talk to Mike Wallace, but it's not a good piece, and it's now I mean,
Well,
the things they're saying about your team have to be really discouraging.
Well, I mean, they wouldn't be there if we weren't doing it. So it was, I actually took it as it was scary, the fact that 60 Minutes was on campus. But I actually sat down with Mike Wallace and just took it as an opportunity to meet Mike Wallace and kind of ask questions. And he was actually a pretty good guy. He sat with me for about an hour and answered every question I had for him. And they did their piece, but their piece, listen, I don't even know what their piece was, but I know that they wouldn't be there if we weren't doing it. So.
But your team at that point is called Basketball's Heart of Darkness, and you've got players with samurai swords and God knows what else. I mean, this is just college basketball at its worst at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you can say that. I mean, I'm sure you could. I mean, samurai swords, that got blown a little bit out of proportion.
It tends to.
Yeah, there was a lot of people. When I look back at my days in Fresno, Adrian Wojnarowski is now the head guy at Yahoo Sports. Andy Katz is now the head guy, one of the head guys at ESPN. Risha Candidate is the woman on First and 10. Mike Hill is an anchor for ESPN. All these people, we helped
make their career.
Catapult their career. There was plenty of stuff to cover, and they covered it, and they did it well, and they liked the details, and sometimes they put a little more into it, but, it is what it is.
Now, it said, the piece that said about you at Fresno State, it said, part Montgomery Clift, part Jerry West, no individual player has ever seized the imagination of the city of Fresno like Chris Herron. He's got NBA talent, Hollywood glitter, and a blue-collar game that local fans fully understand. Pretty heady stuff again. I mean, you're a big man on campus there as well.
Well, something, I would say the last part would probably sum it up with the, a blue-collar game that the Fresno fans really felt. The Hollywood glitter, I don't know about that. The Fresno fans were amazingly supportive of me, and I hope that comes across in the book, how appreciative I am of what they did for me. I mean, let's, to keep it, 100% honest, I mean, I was part of a federal investigation, grand juries, 60 Minutes, Rolling Stone. There was a lot of ups and downs. I was involved in a couple of incidences off campus where police were involved. So, these people could have wrote me off a long time ago, but they embraced me and took me on as one of their own in a lot of ways, most of them. So for that, I'm always grateful,
And throughout all this time then in college, though, it's basketball and drugs, and really not a lot of other things. I mean, right? Not a lot of academics, not a lot of anything else.
There wasn't much time for studying, No, there was not. And honestly, and one thing I say again, and I keep referring back to the kids, the one thing I say that I have the most regret, one of the things is that I didn't pay attention in school, because I'm perfectly capable to sit in the classroom and do the work and write papers and participate as a college student. I did not do that. I was not a college student.
And part of that, if I read it correctly, is you attribute a little bit of that to the lack of preparation in high school. Is that since you were such a great athlete and could score virtually at will, that some of the academic side, the academic preparation for college and beyond was lacking, or was excused, I should say.
Yeah, and something, it was my last year in high school when they finally changed the SAT and the GPA, where it's now on a sliding scale. When I was a senior in high school, all you needed to get was 700 on your SAT and pass your courses. So there wasn't much motivation, to do well in school. I knew I was going to get the scholarships. So all my goals were to get a 700 and pass, which is sad. It truly is. I have a brother who went to BC and played basketball there for a year, but is extremely bright. And on his SATs, 1,1400 and straight A's through high school, and did it differently. I didn't. you know.
But your whole goal, really, was it from the time you were in high school, was to play in the NBA?
No.
Oh no, you didn't see that as the.
How could you? As a kid from Fall River, there was nobody that had done it before me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so my goal growing up as a kid was to be a Durfee basketball player, and then goals changed was to be part of BC and keep going. And even at Fresno, it took me a while before I said, you know what, maybe this can be possible. You know, maybe I can make it to the NBA. But no, I really didn't look at it like that. And not to mention the fact that my life was so fast, it was tough to slow down and really look at goals. You know, I was just trying to get through. You know, my main goal was to get the next opponent. I wasn't looking beyond that. I wasn't that type of kid.
Oh really? So it was just a very short-term view of the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I didn't have much time. The social life was, you know, much more time-consuming than basketball. You know, at that time in my life.
Chris's college career at Fresno State went like this. He played 87 games. He averaged 30.2 minutes per game, had a total of 166 three-pointers, 471 assists, averaging 15.1 points per game. We need to take a break. But when we return, we'll talk to Chris Herron about his professional years in the U.S. and overseas. Stay with us.
From day one, I knew I took the right step.
The Massachusetts School of Law is challenging.
But you feel welcomed and supported at every turn.
You're learning the professional skills you need to get hired.
From professors with real-world experience.
Trust me, that makes a huge difference.
I now have a job I love, and the best part is, I'm not in debt.
No LSATs required. Teachers that make a difference at the most affordable law school in New England, the Massachusetts School of Law. Your future starts here.
There's something about you, baby. I can't get enough. There's something about you, baby. I got you looking at me, I'm gonna call you bluff. There's something about you.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. It takes a man to be a dad.
Earning your law degree shouldn't burden you with overwhelming debt. At Massachusetts School of Law at Andover, we believe it should be affordable, achievable, and yes, even an enjoyable first step to your successful career. We believe in an atmosphere of support, flexible class scheduling, and hiring professors with real-world experience, ensuring you leave law school with the professional skills you need. We are the most affordable law school in New England, and we believe in you.
The Massachusetts School of Law. Your future starts here.
Welcome back. Our discussion today is with Chris Herron and his new book, Basketball Junkie, a memoir. Chris began his professional basketball career in 1999 when he was drafted by the Denver Nuggets. He was drafted in the second round, 33 overall. Let's hear what Chris says about being drafted.
It was great. It was absolutely great. I mean, I was married. I was expecting my first child. You know, the work had paid off. Dan Issel took a chance with me and drafted me, and it went well initially. You know, I was surrounded by some very good veterans in Denver, with McDyess, with George McLeod, Roy Rogers, and they looked after me, and they knew my history, they knew my past, and they made sure that I kind of walked the straight line, which turned into a decent second half of the season for me in Denver, which led to a trade to Boston.
Let me ask you about that, the drug use even then and before, as you were getting ready to leave college. Did it never cross your mind that potentially was really going to mess up any potential chance to make real money at the game that you had worked really so hard at?
You know, it was always in the front of my mind that this could blow up in front of me at any moment. But by the time I really sat down and thought about it, it was already way out of control. And You know, like I said, I was able to go through Denver. You know, I was underneath the rookie substance abuse program very early because of my history in college. So they put me in a substance abuse program where I was tested, drug tested much more than other rookies, and I went through that. You know, but again, I was surrounded by good friends, positive veterans who looked out for my well-being. Popeye Jones was there, Chauncey Billups was there, and you know, they helped. And I was in Denver and away from, you know, it was an unfamiliar place to me. So that year went well, you know. And it went very
well.
Yeah, it went well for me. You know, I mean, that was probably the healthiest I had been in years. Was that year with Denver.
Now, Frank, you were Chris's agent at that point. He had signed with you. What does an agent try to do to help their client get on the right path, or is it just that that's their private life that he keeps private? He doesn't obviously disclose a lot of it to you. And I mean, are there things that you can try and do?
Well, sure, there are things you can try and do, and at some point, it registered me that something was wrong. At that time, I hadn't had much experience with people on doing drugs. Since that time, I've had a lot of experience with it. And one of the things that we don't realize sometimes is almost every family there is affected by this drug thing. Chris is not unusual. He in that regard. There's so many kids, and it's a tough thing once you're on it. And anyone who's been around people who are on it, who they love, realize that. But I didn't realize it. What I did realize at some point was that Chris was too good a basketball player to be doing as bad as he was doing. And, you know, he had a couple of injuries at Boston, bad shoulder injury, and all those things seemed to delay what we knew he could do. But then the delays just got longer and longer and longer. And at some point, I said to myself, and I think I even told Chris, he might remember it better than me, but I told him, look, Chris, I don't know what the reason you're not doing well is, but there's something wrong here. And we discussed this with his closest people, and I think we were all sort of, everyone around him was somewhat of an enabler, whatever that means. And I've discussed this a lot with Chris, so this is not a new subject. And we've tried to figure out, when do you become an enabler rather than somebody who's helping? And boy, the line is thin. And from my standpoint, I just basically sort of had enough at some point. And I realized that Chris and me, he wasn't listening to me, and whatever I could do for him wasn't working. And we sort of, I don't say we split apart, but we just realized it wasn't working. And I didn't know the reason, to be honest with you.
Did you just keep it all mostly to yourself, and maybe a few close friends from Fall River who probably did drugs with, and everyone else, you kept this whole life hidden?
Well, it really came out in Boston.
Right.
You know, it really came out in Boston. And, you know, the cocaine going out on Saturday, Friday, Saturday turns into Sunday and Monday. You know, then you get off it for a couple of weeks and then get back on it. Now, when I crossed the line into opiates, it became a daily habit. And once that became a daily habit, that's when things really started to snowball. People knew, I'm sure, not exactly what, like Frank said, like he didn't know exactly what I was doing, but the outcome was never right, and the results were never right. So there was something that was hindering my ability and to not only be a basketball player, but to just be a good person, you know, and do the right things. I was caught up in a very vicious cycle, you know.
But how would someone know? I mean, you know, because for the most part, I imagine you're keeping the purchase and the use of the drugs pretty secret. So how would someone know? And I mean, they can tell you, Chris, you got to do this. You got to straighten out. You got to, but most of that you're probably doing in the private space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, people could have pulled me aside back then and said, you know, hey, Chris, what's going on? And I wasn't going to listen.
Yeah, I think you say that. You say, you know,
I was on
straighten
my way.
out.
Yeah, you know, something I had, and at that time, I had money to continue it. You know, at that time, I wasn't really feeling the effects, of the drug, because I wasn't broke. My kids weren't hurting for money. My wife wasn't trying to pay bills. That was already taken care of at that time. So there really wasn't a ton of fallout from my drug abuse besides what was going on internally. But as that drug use continued, it was very easily and very evident throughout. People back at that time could not have really picked up on it, or helped.
Well, and you're also the star, right? I mean, you get drafted by Denver, they have a parade, and they have, you get a police escort back through town. I mean, you're the big deal and one of the few people in Massachusetts who have ever been drafted and then ultimately going to play for the Celtics. I mean, this is, again,
It's a fairy tale.
It is.
Yeah.
Right?
No, there's no doubt about it. And I say that that's the power of substance abuse. That, I played in my driveway for hours, shoveled driveways in rain as a Boston Celtic, and from the time I was 6 years old up to be there. And once I got there, I could care less.
Well, see, and that's the difficult part I found in the book, because my own background is a little more blue collar, and I come from the city as well. And I mean, you were lucky. You were one of the guys who made it out. This shouldn't have happened to you. You had it all. You're making $500,000 playing for the Boston Celtics at Boston Garden. I mean, that is a fairy tale.
I mean, it's a fairy tale to you because you never lived it.
Right.
So live it and then tell me if it's a fairy tale. You know what I mean? It's not a fairy tale to everybody.
Can I interject one
Sure,
thing?
yeah.
Mike, sometimes we use cliches and we wonder, gee, that guy's really cliched. But I got to tell you, the cliche that comes to my mind here is, and it's not just Chris, and a lot of them don't get on drugs, but money is a drug. To them,
Sure.
And they blow it quickly. Easy come, easy go. That's a cliche, but it's very true. When you earn something really hard, it's a lot harder to give it up, and you build a foundation. And I think Chris never got a chance to build a foundation because of the whirlwind he was in.
So it's not a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So
Well, it wasn't my fairy tale. I understand where you're coming from. Let me tell you something. I dreamed about it.
right,
Just
you,
like
you
you
did.
did.
Right.
Yeah, just like you did. But what I'm trying to say is when you land, when I was put in that position, traded to Boston, and went through what I went through and getting injured and then becoming hooked on OxyContin, that's a nightmare. So let me tell you, there is no fairy tale days are over. Waiting in parking lots, I could care less about the Celtics. I was more worried about getting those little pills. That wasn't even an issue. So, I mean, I look back, I said it in the book. I look back at it now. I watched the importance of and the power of the Boston Celtics through my kid's eyes when I took him back to a game when I was a year and a half sober, and he stood up and watched the whole game and never sat down. Now then I could appreciate it. I could not appreciate it then. How could I appreciate anything when I was in full-blown addiction mode?
Well, you made reference to the year between Denver and the Celtics. Almost in retrospect, you wish you had stayed in Denver. Again, I think a little further from home, from the kids you probably grew up with, and all those influences that are there. Is it playing in the professional basketball that ended up being the nightmare, or returning home as the visiting hero yet again?
You know something? It was I understand where you're coming from with that question, but that's always the easy way out.
Yeah.
And that was always given to me. And that was part of, when Frank talks about enabling, it's very easy for reporters or growing up as a kid to say, you got to get away from Fall River.
Yep.
And you got to get away from your buddies. And you got to get it, But, Chris Herron got high in Beijing. Chris Herron got high in Tehran. Chris Herron got high in Istanbul. Chris Herron got high everywhere he went. And then when none of my friends are around, and Fall River was far, far away. So, it was me who had to deal with it, and I never did, and I never took a moment to stop and look at it and go into a treatment facility and try to take care of this. So, it's tough.
Well, and you make reference to that in the book too. You say, well, you'd think by the time you get back to the Celtics, you have the perfect life. And it's anything but at that point. It's crashing all around you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, it was crashing the Celtics' life so bad that it was tough to remember, to be quite honest. I mean, that year and the summer league year and then the year that I got cut in preseason, I mean, it's tough. Bill Reynolds had to remind me a lot of it, you know, because that's how much of a whirlwind my life is. I was living in Waltham, practicing for 2 hours, flying down to Fall River, picking up my drugs, flying back to Waltham, being a father, being a husband, flying from city to city, making sure I had the drugs. It was crazy. I mean, there was no time to really appreciate that lifestyle.
You tell one story in there, and that's where I finally got the title, Basketball Junkie. It really had some impact with me. You make reference to being in your Celtics sweats, getting ready for a game that's going to be nationally televised, and you're just outside the Garden waiting for your dealer to show up so that you can even run the layup line prior to the game to be able to function.
Yes, absolutely, and that's where it leads you. You know, here I am, I have, family, friends, 15,000 people coming to watch. You're a Boston Celtic kid from Fall River, and I'm in my warm-ups in the parking lot, by myself, waiting for this kid to show up, so I become healthy enough to be able to even play if I get the opportunity to.
It must be, Frank, for a lot of these players then in the NBA, with the women, the money, the drugs, and all of the external influences, and especially the hangers-on, very, very difficult to be able to manage all of the activities in a professional way so that they have a life after basketball.
Oh, it's really difficult, and it's not something that there's a formula for, because everybody comes from a different place. And although I've had guys who've managed it well and done well with it. And I think the key with those guys was some real solid discipline from an early age, and maybe the ones who manage it the best have been not as talented as some of the others. I think Chris, I don't think people realize what a good player he really was, and a lot of it was natural. There's no reason why he knew how to pass the ball well. He really knew how to play team game, and it doesn't seem to mix with the selfishness he showed in doing drugs and all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. But he was a real team player. He knew how to win. He was a winner. And I think he had so much talent. I think those guys sometimes have a little more trouble than some of the guys who have to bust their butt from the beginning just to get to the next spot, to the next level, to the next level. And a perfect example of that would be that one of the guys I've dealt with in my basketball days is Scott Brooks, who's the coach of Oklahoma Thunder. Scott Brooks is one of the most disciplined guys, and if you compared Scott Brooks' talent to Chris Herron's at different ages, there's no comparison at all. Chris is so much better as a talent, but sometimes talent doesn't do the whole thing. And I think there's a discipline, and I don't even know if it's the people around you, because I think the people around Chris love him, and even when he was having trouble, I didn't see anyone who was around him trying to take advantage of him. His wife is a great gal. Bill Reynolds is a terrific guy and a good friend of Chris's, maybe a second father. His father was always a terrific guy around me. I never saw anything bad in his brother Mike. They were all very interested in Chris. I never once heard them crying about themselves. So I think they all cared, but it just didn't translate. And I think only Chris can answer that.
Yeah, it's tough, man. I see it all the time today when I talk to family members of kids who are struggling, or loved ones of kids people who are struggling. It is so hard to take that head on, because that means you have to acknowledge all of it. Mm-hmm. You really have to look into what's really happened over the last so many years. And that's very hard to do. It's very hard to say, you know what, I love you, but you've stolen this, you've written this check, you've hurt my feelings here, you didn't show up at this time. Those are very tough things to bring up. And loved ones, they're in a very tough situation to really take those things head on. So for my brother and my father and my mom and my wife and Bill Reynolds, it would be extremely difficult. Mm-hmm. And you know something, I probably wouldn't have paid attention. Mm-hmm. I think it really, what it came down to was whether or not I wanted to either get sober or go to jail or die. That's what it was.
And one thing I want to mention, I didn't mention Chris's mother. I really didn't know Chris's mother. I met her one time. I'm sure she felt the same way as his father, brother, and all those. I didn't leave her out intentionally. I just really didn't know her.
You know, my mom had private eyes following me. My mom knew what I was doing before before anybody. And my mom had talked to me about it and wanted me to get help. But, you know, when your kid is hurting and your kid needs money or your kid is struggling, you know, it's a very fine line. You know, which way do you go? Do you love them or do you let them go?
Yep.
It's.
Is it just the addiction is so compelling? I mean, is that what it is? Because you may reject that you have it all, as many would see it, but geez, you have a future. I mean, Ray Allen's playing for another championship this year, and you were on the cover of Sports Illustrated coming out of high school.
Yeah, I hear you. I could really care less about where Ray Allen is, to be quite honest with you.
I hear you.
Great for Ray Allen, but like I said, in measuring stick to where I'm at today, I have it all. I wouldn't change my spot today and how I feel on the inside, my soul, for any Celtics jersey, Nuggets jersey, any jersey.
Would you change the journey?
I would change it, not for me,
right?
For my children.
Right, and your wife.
And my loved ones.
You're right. Because it had to be a tough journey watching what you went through.
Especially watching through sober eyes. I went through numb. They went through sober. I would change it for them. I wouldn't change it for me.
Because you really do believe that it's made you the person you are today.
There's no, I mean, that's 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Come here. Let's see how this looks.
Hey, how's my little horse?
She's a lion.
Yes, she is.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. When you adopt a child from foster care, just being there makes all the difference.
Taking the first step towards your legal career can be an overwhelming task at many other law schools. Lucky for you, the Massachusetts School of Law is not one of those schools. Applying is easy. No LSATs required. Scheduling is flexible with daytime and evening classes, and learning is remarkably rewarding since all of our professors have real-world experience. All of this and much more at the most affordable law school in New England.
The Massachusetts School of Law. Your future starts here.
Let me ask you a little bit about the warning signs that you talked about in high school. I mean, the partying every weekend. You know, is that really where it starts? Is a couple of beers or a bottle of cold duck for you, and then it's you just move through there?
I think so. I mean, I think certain people are predisposed to it. I think it's genetic. I think you're born with that gene of you know, whether or not, you know, it will come out in you. But you know, I think I say to kids all the time, what is it that you want to change about yourself? You know, and I had to ask myself that. What is it that I really don't like about me that I need to put something in me to become somebody else? And I ask kids that today when I go and speak at their schools or their colleges. Ask yourself that question, and maybe you'll figure it out. You know, but you know, whether it's in high school that you socially you're awkward or you're scared to or nervous around people, so you have to have a couple of beers to dance or whatever it is. But I believe it starts then. I believe marijuana and booze is the beginning of the process. You know?
You talk in your book, and I just want to read it so that I quote it correctly. It says two things actually back to back. One thing is people can't believe that you could shoot up in the car with your daughter in the car. And then the other thing that I think helps to explain it says people think that when you're doing drugs, you're high all the time out partying. They think you're having fun. That is not it at all. You're not having fun. You're in hell. Without the dope, I would be dope sick, so sick that I couldn't do anything, couldn't even get up. I'd be in a fetal position. So at some point, you're doing drugs simply because you have to.
Yeah, there's no social. Once you cross the lines of heroin and OxyContin, there is no more social aspect to your life. You know, it overcomes it. It becomes your life. So my wife wanted to take that part out of my daughter in shooting up in the car.
I can see why.
Yeah, but you know something? There's another parent right now doing that.
See, that's hard to believe as a parent, but at some point, it's the addiction that makes you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can't be that hard to believe. You know, I mean, it's all over the news. You know what I mean? And you can look at it however you want to. Whether a parent has a few beers and puts their kid in the car seat, what's the difference?
Right.
You tell me.
No, I hear
you.
I
know plenty of parents who've pulled over at restaurants and chugged down a couple of drafts and threw their daughter and son in the back seat. You know, is there a little difference of severity of the drug? No doubt about it. The details that go into it, absolutely. But you know something? I didn't do this book to get rich. I didn't do this book to become anything but raise awareness, and maybe because through a program that I go to and hearing people's honesty, I was able to get sober. You know, and hearing other people talk about the pain that they inflicted on their children gave me the courage to talk about the pain that I put on mine, which healed me. And if there's somebody out there that can get something out of that, then so be it. I never thought, there was a time in my life that I never thought I could get through this guilt and this shame. And I was so wrong.
Could I just add one
Sure.
thing to that? What about parents who aren't drug addicts, who aren't drinkers, who inflict pain on their kids?
Oh, sure.
We all do that at some time because we're not perfect people. And I think Chris's imperfections are his, but we all have them. And he said a question that we all should ask ourselves as adults. He asked a kid, what does he really want to get out of something, and what does he feel he needs? What about adults? We don't ask ourselves the tough questions either sometimes.
Oh, I agree
I know
with
that,
both of you.
You know,
and I know Chris is, to me, and I think it is important to leave it in because to me it helped convey to me the depth of the addiction, because obviously you're a parent and throughout the book you see the love you have for your children and your wife. But knowing that you're in hell, and there's, at least at this point in time, there's no one reaching down to pull you out. And as you've said in other places, no one else can do it. You're the one that's got to find the way out of this.
You're absolutely right. And excuse me, a very profound moment. And to be quite honest with you, I don't even know if I put this in the book. But I had come back from treatment. And after watching my son, Drew, my third child, be born, and I walked through after relapsing 40 days into it. And I walked through the door, and this little Italian guy who ran the facility that I was at in New York looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why don't you do the most admirable, courageous thing of your life and get away from your children? Let them go. Let them heal. Let them live. Because all you do is sink them." And that night I went to bed and I contemplated whether or not I should. And from that moment on, I decided to be their dad. You know? Whatever happened in the past was the past. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it was a very spiritual moment for me. It was a crossroad, and I was very close to letting my kids go.
And you say there's a big spiritual component to that, to you, and that's what I want to ask you about. Is I'm gonna ask you, is this the final act? Because I do see salvation, and I do see a lot of spiritual aspects to it. The nuns allowed you to use the gym, and that's what helped you get the school going. And then you say that you pray regularly for help with this, because it can't hurt.
Can't hurt, and I need every prayer that I can get. So, something there's a very spiritual aspect. See, I think there's a spiritual aspect to everything. It's just you got to see if you're aware of it. And fortunately enough, today I am aware of it. And the nuns, at 8 months sober, heroin addict, felonies on my record, let me, handed me a key to their, not only their gym, but to their whole school, and said, you know, let's go on. Let's help yourself. Let me help you get back on track. And from that has become a great company that I've started. But the spiritual side to this is amazing.
Well, it really is amazing. I mean, that the nuns would actually, just as you said, give you the keys to the gym, knowing that there's kids in schools with school there with all of your problems at this point, and that somehow this would be the light out.
Yeah, and they, you know, they said that's what Christianity is all about, forgiveness. You know, and I sat, and she's actually not a nun. The nuns run, there's 2 nuns that live on campus that had to okay it, but the principal, Donna Glavin, she said, you know something, this is what it's about. It's about forgiveness and allowing, you know, someone else to move forward in life, and they did that for me. So,
let's talk a little bit about the basketball camp and the rules that you have there, because I've been involved in youth sports on a very minor level with around here, and it's your philosophy really resonates with me as well, and I think it resonates with a lot of the people that hope to get the best out of youth sports, because you make a point that it's really not about basketball, it's about the things you can learn from basketball. I mean, that is what youth sports is supposed to be about. Most of these kids are not going to be playing in college or the NBA or...
It's about building self-esteem and character and knowing, see, I know there's an end. You know, some kids don't. Some kids like me thought that you'd play basketball forever. But I know there's an end to it. Some end earlier than others. Most do. So if I can have an impact on a kid where they feel comfortable in their own skin, you know, they're happy to return to play the sport and stay fit and stay healthy, you know, then I've accomplished my goal with them. And hopefully their parents. Unfortunately, parents mess up the whole process.
We tend to, don't we?
Yeah, no doubt about it.
You have 4 rules at the camp, and they are to encourage each other, that there be no bullying, no laughing at one another, and don't make anyone feel less than you.
Yes, no doubt about it.
How do you get that accomplished? I mean, because those are easier said than done with youth sports.
Yeah, I tell them that their money will be refunded immediately. I have that talk with the whole camp when it starts with the parents there, that if I see any of this behavior, that, you know, their kids will be, you know, won't be allowed back, because I don't want, there's kids, most kids aren't good at basketball. You know, I have a basketball camp with 100 kids, 15 are good. You know, the others really aren't. They're just trying to stay busy, stay active, and kind of fit in. And when a kid doesn't fit in to something, I think things go sour quick for that child. You know, and I don't want to start that process at a young age. You know, I don't want a group of 6th to 8th grade girls, some girl never coming back to play a sport because she had a bad experience at my camp. There's no way that's happening.
You say in the book, I think today's basketball culture can be very detrimental to kids. The days of playing in your buddy's backyard are over. There's no playing just for fun. No one plays 2 sports anymore, never mind 3. It's all changed for the worse.
You know something, I love basketball, I love what it could do for kids, but I also think that the culture of it has changed. I think that parents are way too involved. I think AAU is way too involved. And I think that's the problem. I think that, you know, my son had to travel 2.5 hours to Middleton, Connecticut in 6th grade to play for a weekend. You know, I mean, that's crazy. You know, he could have did that in Fall River, New Bedford, Brockton, Taunton, and I think there's a lot of pressure to that. You know, there's too much emphasis on success at an early age when you could get that in your driveway, in your local park, and that kind of stuff. So,
and they really feel the pressure of the thought of having to try and get that college scholarship because of you make reference to the price of education being so outrageous these days, that even those young AAU or club soccer athletes really do feel the pressure that they've got to excel because their expectations around them, put on them, are so high.
Well, I think the parents put that on them. I mean, I hear parents in my gym all the time say, well, listen, if he doesn't get a scholarship, then we can't send him to college. That's a whole lot to put on a kid, you know, shoulders to say, listen, if you don't play how we want you to play and how college coaches want you to play, you're gonna save us $200,000. And if you don't, then you go to community college.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah,
Mike?
sure, Frank.
There's something even worse than what Chris said.
Mm-hmm.
Today, and I didn't see that when I was growing up. Parents want to live vicariously through their children, rather than be role models for their children and demand respect and demand discipline and demand performance in other ways. They want to live through their children. And adults can't live through children. It's too much pressure on children. And I think this goes on constantly. And if there's one thing that I read in Chris's book that meant a lot to me, actually, I don't even know if I read it. We talked about it. A little chubby girl, 10-year-old girl who's not such a great player. She's as important to him as the kid who's going to get a scholarship to Duke or Notre Dame. And I think...
And there's a lot more of them than the kid getting a scholarship to Duke or Notre Dame.
And I think we got a lost generation because of this vicariously living through children. They're children, they're not adults. And it's a real problem, and I think Chris addresses it in his book, and I think he's addressed it personally more than most people I know.
Yeah, I address it in my gym constantly.
Right.
It's not allowed. You know, if the parents are overbearing, there is no sideline coaching in my gym.
Yep.
If one parent acts like that, here's your money, take your child. I'm not going to be part of your child's demise because how crazy you are against, you know, towards your child. So the crazy ones, they drop off and they pick up. And then I have them for an hour or 2 hours and we're together, you know, doing this. But yeah, I can't be part of that. I can't be part of that process. I only want to try to, like Frank said, you know, the little 10-year-old girl with glasses is just as important, if not more, than the kid who already has a scholarship to Duke.
Yeah, he doesn't need your help.
Yeah, forget him. No, I'm
he
kidding.
needs God's help.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You said in the book that you never crossed the lines of a basketball court without feeling the stress.
Yeah, of course not.
Well, see, again, that's from outside, that's hard to see because, I mean, you are the high school hero, the college hero, the NBA hero.
Who says?
Well,
Not
that's
me.
what it looks a lot better from this side than obviously your side.
Exactly.
I
I never said that.
No,
no,
you didn't.
I never said I was the hero, the high school hero, this guy, that guy. It was everybody else saying it. So now every time I walk through those lines, it was everybody else saying, well, he's going to average or score this many points tonight. And it's, you know, we're here to watch him play, and he better do A, B, and C. I never said that. You know, I never had those. I never stepped out and said those type of things.
No, I wasn't trying to infer.
No,
you
no,
did,
I know
but that has to be a pretty heavy burden to carry with you because that's what everyone else expects of Chris Herron.
Yes, and that's why I never listen. By nature, I'm a competitor. You know, and then put all the other stuff involved. You know, it becomes a serious competitor. And you know, I never walked through a opposing team's locker room doors to hit the floor or my locker room without a high level of intensity and stress. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
What's the final act?
One day at a time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
One day at a time. I mean, that's what it is. I don't know. God knows. I'm good today, you know, and we'll see what's up for tomorrow.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely.